I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr Show where it's all about the W. Camp has begun, so let's not waste any time and dive in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. If you're looking for a fun new way to enjoy the W, join Winsidr on Playback, our W watch parties. Use the link playback.tv/Winsidr. That's playback.tv/Winsidr. And hey, you never know when we're going to do a WNBA merch giveaway. Welcome back to the Winsidr Show. Excited for this first WNBA training camp edition for the 2023 season. But first of all, make sure, I know I say this before every episode, but make sure you're subscribed to Patreon. We've just refreshed the coverage there. And if you are subscribed, you know this because you have been flooded with content recently. So make sure to subscribe. There's some really cool stuff going on there, and it's definitely worth just a cup of coffee a month. Rachel, camp is upon us. Life gets crazy. It feels like not too long ago, March Madness just finished. Not too long before that, the WNBA season just finished. What's kind of piquing your interest? What's on top of mind for, as I like to call you, Hoff?
Oh my gosh. I said it the last show. I just feel, it's just like I feel like we're kind of in a holding pattern. Obviously, it's like the calm before the storm, if you will. Like just waiting to kind of see the product on the floor. I think you get little snippets here and there of how teams are looking, and you see certain snippets about how coaches are reacting to certain rookies that are how they're performing, and you're hearing a lot of things in certain press conferences, media days, whatever that might be. I think for me, really intrigued with the Connecticut Sun. I think that we've become so accustomed to that team for so many years. Still have some key pieces, but they shifted so much during free agency. Alexis Morris and their draft wasn't huge by any stretch, but I'm curious to see just how this team ends up shaking out. Combined with the new system of Steph White, and just kind of what that's going to look like. I mean, I've said it before, I'll keep saying it. There feels like there's a 5 or 6 really massive question marks in this league right now. And again, that's obviously half the league. So you have just question marks of what is this complete unknowns, ends of an era, if you will. So I would say really intrigued with Connecticut. How does Alexis Morris fit in to that roster? You had the additions of Ty Harris, Becca Allen, things like that. Bree Jones obviously is the focal point returner. Alyssa Thomas, so you do have pieces of it, but there's so many elements of newness. And on the other side, I mean, I'm going to keep talking about the Indiana Fever because it's been such a good talking point for so many years, and what it, the last 5 years, I feel like, everything we've seen and the reemergence of that organization. Can this new head coach, take that next step? Are they prepared to take that next step? I mean, you've got a team there that could potentially sign 3 draft picks to the roster, depending on how it shakes out. Does Grace Berger end up, being that player that ends up, really making this team and contributing? I think she can. I know they've been speaking very highly of her recently, but those are the things that I'm kind of just thinking through in my mind, as we're leading up to the show, and just probably the 2 teams that I'm most focused on. I know everybody wants to say Las Vegas and New York, but I'm really intrigued with Indiana and Connecticut specifically.
Well, first of all, I completely agree. And Rachel knows, and a few other people in the know that there was a recent night that I had a little bit too much wine and a little bit too much afternoon coffee, and just like went crazy deep
You
dive
did. You
into
did.
all of the teams. Um, Shout out as always to her hoop stats because they provide a necessity, which is salary cap information and details.
For sure.
So let's touch on some of these teams. First of all, why not talk about the Liberty out of the gate? Liberty and Vegas, because they're the two easiest teams to talk about, in my opinion, when it comes to the current specifics and the current play out that we're at now. So the Aces have 11 on the books, basically. Um, but if they want to keep Sydney Colson, who, yeah, she's not pulling the biggest minutes, but if you look at the social media presence of the Aces, excuse me,
Is
I
a
think it's
huge
pretty clear
asset
to
to
see
that
that they
team.
expect. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're totally right. But if they want to keep her on the team, they're going to either have to cut Asia Shepard or Kirsten Bell.
Hmm.
So it's going to be interesting kind of to see what they do there, losing, recent draft picks for a player who has shown importance, no doubt. But it's just an interesting aspect there. Also, look, some additions of like Kayla George and Alicia Clark maybe make that decision a little bit easier. Um, but keep an eye out for some cuts in that regard. And then the Liberties is a more interesting one. It's a little bit more confusing, so bear with me. But in the general scheme of things, when it comes to all these different teams, it's fairly simple. They got 9 people on the books, 138K in cap space. They can sign 2 straight up and play at 11. If they sign Prince, they can't sign Nira Sabali without cutting someone else. Um, if they sign Prince, they can sign Han, Sika, or Marine. Obviously, we know they want Marine. So basically, the roster is set, and this is my perspective. I assume Han and Marine make the team, and then it comes down to either Sika or Sabali if they cut Didi or Jocelyn Willoughby. So in
Woo.
in if we want to skip from like in the weeds to just the end point, it comes down to either they keep Sika uh, or Sabali, but then they need to cut Didi or Jocelyn Willoughby. So either you're saying, hey, there goes 2 high potential draft picks from recent years,
Yeah.
high picks also, or you're cutting, Didi, who has shown an immense importance to this team, not just as a bench player who hypes up the team, but also as a role player. And then Jocelyn Willoughby, like similarly, another player who not a superstar, but has shown importance on this team. So I will also say that Willoughby having a slightly larger contract in this case won't affect it. But in many cases, a very smart WNBA agent spoke to me one day and said, look, in the new CBA, it's going to be the death of the middle class.
Yeah.
Take the lowest contract because you don't want 5,000 to be a reason that you are
You're
booted
leaving
from a
too.
team.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Fascinating point. Great.
So it's really interesting because most people are like, oh, make your money, make your money, make your money. Yeah, that's cool and all, but like would you rather like guarantee to make it all or may have the possibility of making 10,000 more? It's the mystery box. Shout out to Family Guy or The Simpsons or whatever that gets from. But the Connecticut Sun, first team you talked about.
Yes.
In my mind, you have 9 locks, and that's Dewana Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, Bree Jones, Tiffany Hayes, Becca Allen, Natisha Heidemann, Ty Harris, and Dejanay Carrington. Now you might say, sorry, and oh no, Olivia Nelson Ododa. That's the 9 in my mind that are locks. You could argue that oh no is not a lock. You could argue maybe Ty Harris isn't. I would argue against that because I think they need that point guard
I
depth.
disagree. I think
You
she's
could
a
argue
lock.
Natisha Heidemann. What?
I think she is a lock for sure.
Yeah. Is there any of those 9 that you think are not locks?
No, I agree with you on that.
So I think then people would then look at and question, well, why isn't Nia Clouden a lock? The reason I don't think she's a lock is basically with Clouden on roster, right? With their 10 players, if you include her, they don't have enough money to sign Alexis Morris. their pick from this past year, or Prechtel. So, well, Prechtel they could actually, but that's not here nor there. Essentially, because of where players are drafted, the base contract that they're signing is slightly different scales, and only having 62 in cap space and Alexis Morris being a 65 cap hit based on where she was drafted, that puts them in a tough situation. Now, the question I have is Nia Clouden is somebody of the old guard. We both know how much Kurt Miller loved Clouden, but does that mean specifically that she's going to get a shot on this team? I don't think so. I mean, not to say that she won't get a shot, but to say that the person who drafted you and had you in mind for a certain role is no longer there. Can Alexis Morris jump that? Now, call me a jerk, call me a hater, yay, call me whatever you want. And also keep in mind that this is on the assumption that Becca Allen is healthy and Tiff Hayes
Right.
comes over and
Right.
plays on time and all that jazz.
Right. Which
I don't like to, especially in the W where they are not as forthcoming or revealing about injuries, especially ones that happen overseas. See countless examples just this year. I always like to assume that the players are healthy unless told otherwise. But so for me, the interesting aspect is I'm looking at Clouden or Morris, right? Maybe one of these others, cracks it. We saw that they got rid of Kiki the other day, which is a whole nother discussion of like why you're cutting people that early. What's the reasoning behind it? But that's a different episode. But I look at this and I go, and I'm curious for you, Rachel. I know you didn't see the exact post because I was the one who dropped a rage bomb on you. Now, Alexis Morris has been very vocal since being drafted about how she did not feel prepared for WNBA training camp. And I think a fair pushback to some of the things she said was a lot of what she was putting on the teams in college, in my opinion, should be put on the players. One of the things she said is like, we need to be watching more W. Well, that's a you thing, not your coach thing. Yes,
we've been screaming that for a decade now.
Yeah. And do we think coaches should show you more W tape? Yes, of course. But like, and this is to her next point of like, they should be preparing us for the playing style. Yes and no. Like, no, they shouldn't. If I'm a college coach, Rachel, my job is to make sure, first and foremost, that our team and players succeed in their current position at the school. Do I want my players to succeed after in life? Yes, 100%. And maybe this is like a poor take from someone who's never played collegiately and only covers pro sports. But I, at least from my perspective, think that you have to understand that these college coaches will be fired if they decide on, in whatever, for this next season, we're going to play a style of game that will prepare our players better for the pros. Keep in mind, most of our players won't make it to the pros anyways, because there's not enough spots for them. But we're going to change our style of play so that you'll be more prepared for the pros and then have a horrible season and get fired. Like, to me, you have to have success as a college coach. Otherwise, you don't have a job to prepare people for the W. So I think it's a little bit of a catch-22. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I am curious, like, in your mind, is that just a player who has faced the harsh realities of the real world? Or am I not reading into it enough that, hey, maybe she had a couple bad days at camp and maybe Nia Clouden could be beating out Alexa? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I have to be really choice with my words here. Because obviously I'm extremely involved in the NCAA game and I'm extremely involved in the WNBA game. There's a lot. I could go on an entire show rant about this, but I'm going to choose not to. I really think it is a shock. It's a complete shock. When you make that jump, every rookie, who steps into training camp, they're surprised. It's been that way since the beginning of time. It's even like that way when men make the jump from the NCAA to the pro leagues. So like what I'm hearing is just a player who's going through those adjustments and that jump. Now, if you want to say it's someone else's fault and it's not just a part of the process, that's completely fair, but it's still going to happen. Like you can't, like, we're talking about college basketball and we're talking about a jump to a league that's, less than 30 years old, but still an amazing product, is growing, blah 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 blah. I'm sure camp is hard. Now imagine walking into these camps and you're going toe to toe, with Alyssa Thomas, and she's steamrolling you in the lane, and you're flying across, and no one's gonna sit there and help you up. Like this is your job now. It intrinsically is different. Now, granted, you could make an argument about NCAA with NIL now at the highest levels is really starting to mirror the pinnacle of financial gain and pros and whatever. But I mean, you're literally it's a change. It's never not going to be a change. And I think that you are reading into it enough. I think camp probably for any rookie is a challenge. I'm sure your head is spinning as it is when a high schooler goes to college and they're their freshman year and their head is spinning and they don't know what the hell is up and down, what we're left or right. I look at it as that's going to happen, and it's not necessarily about preparing. I think we've got to take some accountability as young women. I mean, get on social media and you can see plenty of where your future employer is playing, where you can access that. Like, you've got to take some accountability and dive into that more and embrace that more. We've had draft picks that couldn't even name a WNBA player on our show, so like, whose fault is that? To me, it's an accountability thing. If you want to study who your future employer is going to be, you got to do that work. That's all I'm going to say about that aspect of it. But I do think that, we've talked about bridging that gap from the grassroots to the WNBA. Now we're talking about bridging the gap from collegiately to the WNBA. There's a whole lot of things we could talk about. So, and then on the other hand, I can understand, like, the pro style of play is vastly different than the college basketball style of play, for sure. But like, they're two different entities. They're two different jobs. It's like comparing apples to oranges to me. And what those college coaches, what Kim Mulkey, what Gino, even down to, the lower levels are trying to do to win games and to win their conference and go be competitive. Like, anyway, I'm going on a massive rant right now, but I do think you're probably reading into just natural frustrations of a rookie in training camp. And natural frustrations of just like the reality of what you just stepped into is probably like nothing you really probably could have been prepared for. So let's dive into what are the things I could have done differently, or my team, my coaches, the people around me could have helped me with. I think that was what was trying to be communicated there. Yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Love it. No, I appreciate your insight. And I also think, like, no, part of me, no,
I'm clearly passionate about that topic. I'm a firm believer that the younger generation has got to embrace the WNBA more, and they've got to do the work. Like, if I'm going into a job interview and I don't know anything about the company, that's on me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, 100%. And like, you had time from the championship before the draft, after the draft. Like, there's more than enough time. I just keep thinking about, like, just wait till you go overseas. That's the line that keeps popping up in my head. Is like, and this isn't a shot towards towards Morris specifically. I think a lot of other people probably feel that way, have experienced the same, maybe even posted on social media similarly. Like, this is a new wave, a new generation of people who are more comfortable, and props to them, expressing their feelings on social media. And
I also think
good
that
for them. Express yourself.
Those feelings are super valid. I mean, it's like, whoa, this is happening. What could have taken place up before this point to help me be more prepared? I think that is a completely great conversation. Those are great conversations to be had, questions to be asked. Like, clearly, I don't know what it feels like to walk into a training camp as a player, as a rookie. I can only imagine, the whirlwind that is. So I actually like the topic. Obviously, I'm going on a rant about it. I like the topic. I like the questions. I like to have conversations about it, because I am, again, a huge believer of continuing to find ways to bridge that gap in between the highest levels of the collegiate level and the pros. And how do we, again, just, you can't connect them fully because they're two different entities, but how is there a way that we can help, again, players understand the systems, the styles, the culture that they're getting ready to walk into?
Completely agree. It's a topic we could do like 15 other episodes on.
All right,
real quick, because I know we're supposed to do a short episode. Next team, Indiana Fever. Completely agree with you. I know we've talked about the Fever a fair amount in recent episodes, maybe people are sick of it. So we'll throw in one more team after it and I'll be brief. But you are 100% right. They have more cap room than they can do with it. And the funny thing is that isn't like they were in that same situation a few years back when they had a different GM. Not going to throw shade, so I'm not going to say the name. But back then they were just throwing crazy money at vets. Now they're saying, let's hold on to some of that money. Let's wait. And they're in a position where they can have a look. This isn't going to be the type of camp that you're having in New York, where it's just a legit you have a championship roster and a couple people are fighting for those last few spots and you're looking for a specific role player, blah blah. This is going to be a tough one for the Fever because when you're in this situation where you can sign that many young rookies, you kind of have to make that decision of, okay, are we going to have some, like, would we rather have growing pains now for a better future a year down the road, end of the season, beginning of next season, middle of next season? Or do you want to sign players that have a little bit more experience, Maya Caldwell, Christy Wallace, and then, maybe be a little bit better now, but aren't as good in the future? And that's kind of the scale that they're on right now. Look, 6
Mhm.
players are a lot: Kelsey Mitchell, Erica Wheeler, Victoria Vivians, Emma Cannon, and Melissa Smith and Aaliyah Boston. Right? In my opinion, those are the definite locks.
You
Now,
wouldn't
players that
you
I
wouldn't add
expect.
Queen you wouldn't add Queen Egbo in there?
The only reason I don't, I do, and perfect segue, Rachel. These are expected, but in my mind, not necessarily locks. Egbo, uh, Lexi Hall, and Destiny Henderson. And the reason they are is because if I'm the coach, or the GM, I 100% are bringing them on, and I like them. All of that said, as you pointed out, they did just have a really good draft where I could very easily see them signing Grace, Boston, McSell, and Saxton. So, like, where at some point there's only 12 spots, you got to push some. It's like the old saying, I don't have any space for that in my head. Let me forget something so I can remember that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just add a billion people. So, and that's not even talking about Bernadette Hattar, Caldwell, Wallace.
I
So,
mean,
like, for
they've got
me,
they've got some really tough decisions to make.
exactly. Huge decisions. I would not be shocked to see any combination, but essentially you have over 260K, well over 260K in open cap space to sign 3 players who are going to be at rookie scale / minimum contracts, aka 70 or less.
Yeah.
So you have no problem signing those 3 players and having money left over in case an injury happens for quick signings and whatnot. So for me, if I'm a WNBA fan, that's one of the most intriguing teams in camp right now because, like, again, there's players you can expect. That team's going to have some shockers. That team's going to have some players who you thought were going to be making that Indiana Fever team. But also, I would say this: the Indiana Fever are a team that have a fair amount of young talent that if you see them do an early cut, I would not be shocked to see another team kind of hop on that, pounce on that. And let's see, one other team, Rachel. Pick me one other team and I'll
Sure.
quickly run down it.
Let's do Dallas.
Oh, ho, ho. Dallas. Dallas is a very interesting one. And I say that about all of them because I'm a nerd and I got really into all these teams and I think it's really interesting. But you have essentially, in my mind, 5 locks, right? You have Aryeh, Natasha Howard, Tierra McCowan, Diamond Shields, and Satu. Those 5 are the locks upon locks upon locks. And then you have Dangerfield, Awak, Burton, Dickey, and 86K uh, open, assuming you sign those players. Now, that's enough for one player with a little bit of change left over. But if they cut Charlie Collier, their number 1 pick from a few years back, which in my mind, if they don't cut her, it's because a certain GM is letting his pride get the best of him. But essentially comes down to this: you can sign 1 draft pick or cut Charlie and sign 2. And that's just based on who they have on the books now. You can do other varieties of it, whatever. So maybe cuts Charlie. Does Crystal Dangerfield make the team? Jasmine Dickey. And can't forget about Latska. I know, Rachel. I mean,
My
gonna be
heart.
late. Right? And then what about Lou Lopez? Seneschal?
Oh
What
man.
about, like
You know,
Maddie,
you really do get
Abby
the
Meyer?
sense that Dallas and Indiana are in like the same boat of like restructurization. I mean, they're not in the same because Dallas feels like it's further along the last couple years, being in that middle pack, but like in terms of new coach, a shit ton of draft picks that you're all trying to figure out how you're going to structure this roster and what this system looks like in this new era. Like you get the sense that they're kind of the same. They're very similar. Very similar. It's gonna be
Oh,
painful.
totally.
When I see some of these cuts, it's gonna be painful for me.
Yeah, and but then you know what? Then there's some other teams, Minnesota, maybe Seattle, maybe LA, who's sitting there and going, "Ooh, let's see who gets cut.
Yeah,
Let's
for
pounce
sure.
on that.
For
Bring them on
sure.
over." For
Yep.
sure. Because and like again, the maybes. Latska, Lou Lopez, Abby Myers, Ashley Jones, like Maddie, right? Like there's a lot of flexibility and possibilities with the Dallas Wings where I'd be extremely interested because again, they have enough room for right straight out two draft pick signs if they waive Charlie. If they don't waive Charlie, they're only able to sign one based on who they already have. Now, obviously, you can replace a Crystal Dangerfield, you can replace in a walk, and by replace, I mean swap out them for a different player. A Burton, maybe like a Jasmine Dickey, who's someone who's on the fence, and then they are able to sign three rookies. There's a lot of possibilities on that, and it's going to be really, really interesting. I mean, we could go down literally every single team. And the reason it's so interesting, we're not going to do it in every on this episode. Maybe we'll do the rest of the teams in the next episode if they haven't already made some decisions by next week. But I think the reason it's so interesting is we saw when the CBA was agreed to, we saw almost almost all the teams approach free agency and the salary cap in slightly different variations of two main ideas. And some of them were like, gung ho throwing money crazy, but then recalibrated quite well. Look at the Indiana Fever. Some didn't do as well. Look at the Minnesota Lynx. And I just think it's really interesting because we talked about it during free agency, right? This isn't just what happened last year impacting this year, it's a buildup of multiple years getting us to this point. So I'm really excited for camp into. It's weird to say I'm excited for the depression that's going to come when we start seeing all these amazing players get cut and like confused why this player got cut instead of this player. Um,
Yep.
but hey, it all comes down to who performs the best when the season actually starts. Rachel, I joked about this, but I'm serious. Who's your goat?
Oh my god, I'm not doing this. You're gonna try all season. I'm not
Then
answering the question.
all season. That's how we end every episode until Rachel answers. Rachel, who's your goat?